The morning sun stretched lazily across the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of peach and gold. The air was crisp, with a breeze that carried the faint scent of cut grass from the small airfield. It was the kind of day that felt harmless, the kind of morning when no one would suspect the skies of harboring danger. At the edge of the tarmac, the Cessna sat waiting, its white body gleaming, wings catching the light like a bird ready to leap. The hum of its engine, still quiet for now, seemed almost eager for the journey. Passengers shuffled forward in twos and threes, carrying backpacks, light jackets, and the casual chatter of people expecting nothing more than a routine hop across the landscape. Among them was a girl small for her age, though she never liked to be reminded of it, who found herself seated in row 8. She pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the propeller blades gleam in the sunlight. Her mother had chosen the window for her, thinking it would keep her distracted during the short flight. To the girl, though, the view was more than a distraction. It was a glimpse into a world far bigger than herself, a reminder of the endless sky she both feared and longed to explore. The pilot, a man in his 40s with calm eyes and a confident smile, moved down the aisle to check on his passengers before takeoff. He made small jokes, pointing out the clear skies ahead and promising them a smooth ride. His presence radiated reassurance. For most, that was enough. After all, flying on a small plane wasn't something they did every day. A professional's easy confidence could calm even the most nervous stomachs. The girl studied him from behind her seat. He seemed unshakable, the sort of person who knew every switch, every dial, every trick the aircraft might demand. Her mother was already flipping through a magazine, her father staring at his phone, but the girl kept her eyes on the pilot until he disappeared into the cockpit. She didn't know why she felt the urge to watch him. Maybe because, deep down, something about this flight felt different. Soon, the passengers were buckled in, the cabin filled with the low murmur of voices and the shuffle of belongings tucked beneath seats. The girl hugged a small notebook to her lap, its pages filled with half-scribbled stories and sketches. She liked to imagine adventures in the skies, heroes who stepped up when no one else could. But she never dreamed she would have to live one. The Cessna's propellers whirred to life, the vibration rumbling through the fuselage. She pressed her nose closer to the window, heart racing as the plane crept forward, aligning itself with the narrow strip of asphalt. The world outside blurred as the engine roared. Gravity pushed her back into the seat, and then, in a rush, the ground fell away. The plane climbed gracefully into the sky. Below them, the patchwork quilt of farmland stretched out, stitched with winding roads and glimmering rivers. Trees swayed in the September wind, their leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson. The girl felt her stomach flip, not from fear, but from awe. She had flown before, but every takeoff felt like magic, like trading the limits of the earth for the boundless promise of the clouds. The cabin settled into quiet calm. Conversations ebbed and flowed. A man in front spoke about his business trip. A pair of teenagers whispered about the music on their phones. A mother bounced her baby on her lap. To anyone watching, it was nothing more than an ordinary flight, ordinary people, ordinary moments. But sometimes the extraordinary lurks beneath the ordinary, waiting for its moment. The girl's eyes lingered on the cockpit door, half closed now, the faint glow of instrument lights spilling through the crack. She imagined the pilot at the controls, hands steady, eyes fixed ahead. In her mind, she pictured him as a captain steering a ship across an invisible sea. Safe, unshakable, always in control. She leaned back, letting the hum of the engine lull her into daydreams. Outside, clouds drifted by like slow-moving castles, their edges gilded by sunlight. The air inside the cabin was warm, carrying the faint scent of coffee from the thermos an older man had tucked by his side. Everything was calm, serene. Yet there was a tension hidden in the stillness, the kind of silence that, if you listened closely, carried the hum of uncertainty. The girl didn't notice it at first. To her, this was just another flight, another story in the making. She thought about the notebook in her lap, the unfinished story she had been writing about a heroine who saved a village from a storm. She smiled faintly, twirling her pen between her fingers, unaware that soon she would be writing her own story, one that no page could contain. As the plane leveled out, the seatbelt light clicked off, and people shifted in their seats, more relaxed now. Laughter rose in small pockets of the cabin. Someone cracked open a soda can. Another tugged a blanket from their bag. To the untrained eye, it was peaceful, utterly unremarkable. But row 8 was not unremarkable. It was waiting. The girl traced her finger along the window, leaving little fog trails where her breath touched the glass. She stared out into the endless blue, her reflection faint against the sky. In that reflection, she saw not just a child, but someone on the edge of something bigger than she could ever imagine. For now, the flight carried on as expected. For now, the hum of the engine sang of safety. For now, no one knew how quickly ordinary could turn into extraordinary, or how a kid in row 8 would soon hold more than a notebook. She would hold the weight of every life on board. The sky outside remained deceptively calm. The plane's wings cut through the clouds with grace. And in row 8, a girl leaned her head against the window, eyes heavy with daydreams, not yet knowing that the dream was about to shatter. The flight had settled into its rhythm. The engine purred like a steady heartbeat. The passengers had fallen into their own small worlds. And the little Cessna felt like a capsule of calm, gliding above the patchwork earth below. For the girl in row 8, it was almost lulling. Her eyelids drooped as she tapped her pen against the notebook on her lap. She scribbled absent lines, the beginnings of a story that might never see its end. Then it happened. At first, it was subtle, a faint shudder that rippled through the cabin. Barely noticeable. A gentle bump, as though the plane had brushed against an unseen ripple in the sky. The girl barely reacted, glancing out her window at the drifting clouds. Planes always shook a little, she told herself. That was normal. But the next tremor was sharper, and this time the passengers noticed. The overhead bins rattled, a coffee cup tipped on its tray, spilling its dark contents across the floor. A few startled murmurs broke out, nervous chuckles rising in their wake, the kind people used when they wanted to laugh away unease. The girl stiffened in her seat. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching the wing outside as it dipped slightly, then corrected. Her stomach twisted, not with the giddy flip of takeoff, but with something heavier, something she couldn't quite name. The loudspeaker crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a little patch of turbulence," the pilot's voice announced, calm and steady. "Nothing to worry about. Please keep your seatbelts fastened." His voice was reassuring, but the girl heard something else behind it, something strained. She couldn't quite place it, but it lingered in her ears long after the intercom went silent. The plane jolted again, harder this time. A baby wailed. Someone gasped. The girl clutched her notebook, her fingers tightening around the thin spine, as if it were an anchor. The passengers around her shifted uneasily, exchanging glances, but most tried to mask their concern. Adults were supposed to be brave. Adults didn't panic. But row 8 was still, eyes wide, heart racing. Outside the window, the sky looked deceptively calm. No storm clouds, no lightning, no angry winds tearing across the horizon. Just a pale expanse of blue, endless and serene. It didn't make sense. How could the air be so smooth, so clear, while the plane groaned and shook as though the sky itself were trying to tear it apart? Another jolt. This one stronger. The overhead lights flickered for a second. Passengers gripped their armrests tighter. A soda can rolled down the aisle with a metallic clatter, punctuating the rising tension. The girl glanced toward the cockpit door. It was still half closed, glowing faintly with the light of instruments inside. She imagined the pilot's hands working quickly, adjusting knobs, speaking into the radio with calm precision. Everything would be fine, she told herself. It had to be. Then the plane dipped. Not a playful dip like on amusement park rides, but a stomach-wrenching plunge that made every soul on board cry out in unison. Oxygen masks rattled in their compartments, though they didn't fall. Bags slid forward under seats. A woman clutched her child to her chest, whispering prayers through gritted teeth. The girl gasped and pressed herself deeper into her seat. Her mother grabbed her hand instinctively, eyes wide, her magazine forgotten on the floor. Her father leaned across the aisle, trying to offer comfort with a shaky smile. But his knuckles were white, where they gripped the armrest. The loudspeaker crackled again. The pilot's voice returned, but this time it wasn't the same steady reassurance. There was urgency threaded through his words. "Control, this is November 765 Charlie. We've got a—" His voice cut off in static, and returned, sharper. "Losing altitude. Request immediate." The rest dissolved in a shriek of interference. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. The passengers stared at one another, searching for reassurance in each other's eyes, but finding only the reflection of their own fear. The girl swallowed hard, her throat dry. She couldn't look away from the cockpit door. Something was wrong. Something worse than turbulence. She could feel it, not just in the way the plane lurched and trembled, but in the way the air inside the cabin seemed to thicken, pressing down on everyone like an invisible weight. A voice, shaky and too loud, broke the silence. "What's happening?" a man demanded from the back. No answer came. The girl's pen rolled off her lap, clattering to the floor, but she didn't bend to pick it up. Her hands were frozen, gripping the edges of her seat. She wanted to ask her mother what was going on, to demand reassurance, but when she looked at her mother's face, she saw the truth. Even adults didn't have answers this time. The plane jolted again. The sound of the engine wavered, faltering for a split second before roaring back. It was a sound the girl would never forget, the sudden emptiness where there should have been power, followed by the desperate surge to reclaim it. Her stomach twisted. Her notebook slid toward the aisle. She let it go. Somewhere inside the cockpit, alarms blared. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. The kind of alarms that didn't sound for just a little turbulence. The girl's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to the sound of her breathing, the thump of her pulse. But even with her eyes closed, she could feel it. The Cessna was falling. The ordinary flight was over. And in row 8, a child sat frozen, staring at the door to the cockpit, unaware that before long, it would be her turn to step through it. The alarms in the cockpit shrieked faintly through the half-closed door, an eerie chorus that made the passengers sit in suffocating silence. The hum of the engine faltered again, sputtering like a heartbeat skipping too many beats at once. Every second stretched longer than it should, as though time itself had slowed down to watch the disaster unfold. Then came the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice was tighter now, hurried, stripped of its earlier confidence. "We've encountered a serious problem." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The words "serious problem" were ones no passenger wanted to hear in the sky. The girl in row 8 gripped her armrest so hard her knuckles turned pale. She had been waiting for reassurance, for the kind of calm explanation that pilots always gave when something went wrong. But his voice wasn't calm anymore. It was urgent, clipped, like someone fighting to hold back panic. The plane jolted again, dropping several feet in a gut-churning plunge. Passengers cried out. The oxygen masks trembled in their compartments, though still they didn't fall. The girl's mother pulled her closer, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay." But her voice cracked, betraying the lie. The pilot's voice returned, faster this time, speaking into the radio. The intercom caught fragments, distorted by static. "Mayday, mayday, engine failure, requesting immediate vectors." The girl's father leaned forward, straining to hear. Passengers craned their necks, staring at the cockpit door, their eyes wide with the primal understanding that control was slipping away. Then silence. The intercom went dead, leaving only the drone of the failing engine and the terrified whispers of those trapped inside the cabin. The girl's heart hammered in her chest. She couldn't stop staring at the door, the faint glow spilling from the cockpit, the muffled sound of alarms still howling inside. She wanted to see the pilot's face, to know what was happening. But part of her didn't want to know, didn't want to see the fear she could already hear in his voice. Another plunge. The plane tilted to the left, and the passengers screamed as drinks spilled. Bags tumbled, and someone's phone slid across the floor. The baby wailed louder, the sound piercing through the chaos. Then suddenly, the cockpit door swung open. The pilot stumbled out, his face pale, his forehead shining with sweat. His once steady gaze was wild now, darting around the cabin as though counting heads. For a moment, the girl thought he was going to say something reassuring, something to calm everyone down. Instead, he turned toward the co-pilot, who was already climbing out of his seat to help. "Get the manual now," he barked, his voice sharp, commanding. The co-pilot nodded and dashed to one of the compartments. The passengers froze, watching with wide, horrified eyes. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't a small hiccup. This was something else entirely. The girl's stomach twisted. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't form into words. What did engine failure mean? How could something so big, so powerful, just stop working? And if it did, how were they supposed to stay in the sky? The pilot returned to the cockpit, leaving the door half open. Through it, the girl caught flashes of glowing red lights, flickering gauges, and frantic hands moving across the controls. She could hear his voice, shouting into the radio again, though the words were broken by static. Losing altitude, unable to maintain need emergency. The rest dissolved into interference. The co-pilot reappeared with a thick manual, its pages fluttering as the plane shook. He flipped through it quickly, his lips moving as he read. The pilot snatched it, scanning lines while still keeping one hand on the yoke. His jaw clenched. He muttered something under his breath, too low for anyone else to hear. Then, for the last time, his voice filled the cabin. "Brace yourselves." Those two words were the kind that cut through everything else, through the prayers whispered under breath, through the cries of children, through the shallow gasps of those too terrified to breathe. They were the words no passenger ever wanted to hear, because they meant only one thing. This wasn't under control anymore. The girl's blood turned cold. Her mother squeezed her hand tighter, pulling her into her arms. Her father's eyes glistened, though he forced a smile he didn't mean. Around them, passengers scrambled to obey, bending forward, clutching the seats in front of them, bracing as they had been instructed in the safety briefing so many ignored at the start. The girl didn't move at first. Her eyes were locked on the pilot, framed in the glow of the cockpit lights. He was still at the controls, still fighting, but there was something in his face, something final. She swallowed hard, forcing herself into the brace position, though her mind refused to stop racing. Was this it? Was this how her story ended? The plane bucked violently, and a tray table snapped open, slamming into a passenger's knee. Someone screamed. Another prayed aloud, voice shaking with desperation. The baby's cries grew shrill, cutting through the roar of the failing engine. And then, in one heart-stopping moment, the pilot's voice broke through again, this time not over the intercom, but shouted from the cockpit. "If anyone can hear me, tell my family." His voice cracked. He never finished the sentence. The girl's breath caught in her throat. Her stomach twisted into a knot so tight she thought she would collapse. The finality of his words echoed in her mind, a shadow darker than any turbulence. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. The pilot wasn't sure he'd survive this. And if he wouldn't, then who would? The cabin fell into a collective silence after his unfinished sentence, the passengers clinging to their seats, to each other, to anything solid, as the plane rattled and groaned. The girl pressed her forehead against her knees, her ears ringing with the sound of alarms, her heart thundering louder than the engine. Somewhere deep inside her, a thought flickered. A thought she pushed away at first, too impossible, too absurd for a child to consider. But it lingered, persistent. If the pilot couldn't save them, someone else would have to. And in row 8, with trembling hands and a racing heart, a little girl began to realize the impossible truth, that someone might be her. The cabin had become a chamber of whispers, prayers, and muffled sobs. The hum of the engine, once steady and reassuring, now sputtered with a sickly rhythm, like a heartbeat faltering in its final moments. Every shutter of the fuselage rattled through the passengers' bones, reminding them that gravity had not forgotten them. In the middle of this chaos sat the girl in row 8. Her seat ordinary, unremarkable at the start of the flight, had become her anchor. The armrests pressed against her ribs, the fabric scratchy beneath her palms, the window framing a sky that now felt like an enemy rather than a wonder. Her mother's hand clamped tightly around hers. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just stay with me." The woman's voice shook, her eyes glistening with fear. On her other side, her father was bent forward, his lips moving silently, reciting words the girl couldn't hear. Everyone around her seemed to be folding inward, shrinking into themselves, as though bracing could shield them from fate. But the girl couldn't shrink. She couldn't fold into herself. Something in her chest refused to let her. She sat stiffly, her wide eyes fixed on the cockpit door. The pilot's unfinished words still echoed in her head, bouncing off the walls of her thoughts. "Tell my family." It was a fragment she couldn't let go of, a fragment that told her more than any manual, more than any alarm. It told her the adults she trusted, the men in the cockpit, the ones who were supposed to be unshakable, were no longer certain. The plane jolted again, harder this time. A bag tumbled from an overhead bin, striking the aisle with a dull thud. A woman screamed, clutching her child tighter. The oxygen masks rattled in their compartments, as though waiting for permission to drop. The girl's heart thundered. She wanted to curl up and disappear. She wanted to hide in her mother's arms, to let someone else make everything better. That's what children were supposed to do. They were supposed to trust the adults. But in row 8, trust had cracked. Her gaze lingered on the cockpit, where the glow of instrument lights spilled through the gap in the door. She imagined the pilot inside, sweat streaking his brow, hands moving frantically across the controls, muttering to himself as he tried to fight the impossible. She could almost hear the shrill alarms, the desperate beeping that refused to be silenced. And she remembered something. Her father, weeks ago, had been reading an article about small planes. He'd explained it absent-mindedly at the dinner table, his voice casual, his hands tracing invisible buttons in the air. Every plane has a radio. You can always talk to someone on the ground. Even if the pilot can't, the radio's there. That's how they survive emergencies. The memory hit her like a lightning bolt. A radio. Someone on the ground. Someone who could help. Her throat tightened. She was just a kid. She had no business thinking about radios or cockpits or saving anyone. She barely understood her math homework, let alone an airplane. But the thought refused to let her go. If the pilot couldn't save them, then who would? The plane dipped again, and a chorus of screams filled the cabin. The girl clutched her seatbelt, her chest heaving. Her mother whispered frantic prayers, rocking her gently, as if rocking could stop the descent. Her father reached across the aisle, trying to keep them together with a trembling hand. And still, the girl's eyes stayed locked on that glowing crack of the cockpit door. Row 8 was no longer just a seat. It was a crossroads. She thought about her notebook, lying somewhere on the floor, pages scattered, her unfinished story abandoned. She thought about the heroine she had written about, the one who had stood against the storm to save her village. That heroine hadn't been ready either. She hadn't been strong, or brave, or perfect. She had simply done what no one else could. The girl felt a lump rise in her throat. Maybe stories weren't just stories. Maybe sometimes they were rehearsals. She took a shaky breath, her small fingers fumbling with the seatbelt clasp. Her mother noticed instantly, her grip tightening. No, stay buckled, sweetheart. Stay here. The girl's voice cracked, but she forced the words out. I have to. Her mother's eyes filled with terror. No, you don't. Just stay with me. The pilots. She cut herself off. She couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew the truth. The girl's chest heaved. Her heart felt like it was trying to pound its way out of her ribs. She was terrified, more terrified than she had ever been. But beneath the fear was something else, something steadier. A voice in her head that whispered, if not me, then who? Another violent jolt shook the cabin. The floor rattled. A panel overhead clattered loose, and passengers shrieked. The plane was slipping, groaning against the pull of the earth below. The girl tore her hand free of her mother's grip. She fumbled with the seatbelt until it clicked open. For a moment, she froze, her body refusing to move, her mind screaming at her to sit back down. Then she stood. The aisle swayed beneath her feet, the plane lurching as if trying to throw her off balance. She grabbed the back of the seat in front of her, steadying herself. Passengers turned, eyes wide, their fear momentarily redirected. From the failing plane to the small figure, now moving down the aisle. What are you doing? Her father called, his voice sharp with terror. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. If she spoke, if she hesitated, she might lose the fragile courage that had pushed her to stand at all. Step by trembling step, she moved forward, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the floor. She passed faces frozen in shock, in disbelief, in fear. Some reached out as if to stop her, but none had the strength to try. It was as though they knew, deep down, that this child's impossible decision was the only one left. The cockpit loomed. Ahead, the open door, spilling its frantic light into the aisle. Alarms wailed louder now, clearer, screaming warnings no one knew how to silence. The girl swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached for the doorframe. Row 8 was behind her now. And for the first time, she wasn't just a passenger. She was stepping into a story she hadn't written, one she had never wanted, but one that had chosen her all the same. The cockpit smelled of heat and panic. Metal, oil, and the faint tang of burning wires mingled in the air, creating a sharp bite that stung the girl's nose as she stepped across the threshold. The alarms were deafening here, shrill warnings layered over one another, lights flashing red and amber across the instrument panel. The pilot was slumped in his seat, his head tilted awkwardly against the headrest, eyes closed. His lips were slightly parted, as if he had tried to say something in those final seconds, but hadn't finished. The sight froze the girl in place, her breath caught in her throat. This was the man who had promised them a smooth flight, the man who had radiated calm confidence. And now he looked smaller, fragile, a shadow of the unshakable figure she had imagined. Beside him, the co-pilot fought desperately with the controls, his face slick with sweat, jaw clenched. His hands darted from lever to switch to yoke, but every movement seemed to only worsen the chaos. The altimeter needle sank lower and lower. The engine sputtered again, coughing like a dying animal. The co-pilot didn't notice her at first. He was too consumed by the impossible task before him. But when the girl stepped closer, clutching the doorframe, he turned, his eyes widening. For a second, disbelief flickered across his face. What was a child doing in the cockpit? "Go back," he shouted, his voice hoarse with strain. "Get back to your seat." The girl flinched, but didn't move. Her legs trembled, her chest ached with fear, but something inside her wouldn't let her retreat. Her gaze dropped to the headset dangling from the panel, its cord swaying with the vibration of the aircraft. The memory of her father's words replayed in her mind. Every plane has a radio. You can always talk to someone on the ground. Her throat tightened. Maybe she couldn't fly the plane. Maybe she couldn't read the glowing dials or silence the alarms. But she could do that. She could talk. She took a shaky step forward, pointing toward the headset. "The radio," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned out by the alarms. The co-pilot followed her gaze. For a moment, his face softened with realization. But then another jolt shook the plane, sending the aircraft lurching downward. He cursed under his breath, gripping the yoke with both hands. "I don't," his words broke, his attention torn. The girl didn't wait for his permission. She reached out, her small fingers wrapping around the oversized headset. It was heavier than she expected, the plastic cool against her skin. The cord tugged back as she lifted it, but she forced it over her ears, the padded cups muffling the chaos around her. For a brief moment, there was silence, blessed silence punctuated only by the faint crackle of static. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the microphone, pulling it close to her lips. Her mouth felt dry, her voice trapped somewhere deep in her chest. She had spoken to strangers before, but never like this. Never with lives depending on every word. She swallowed hard, then pressed the button. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. "Is anyone there? Please. Please, we need help." Static answered it first. Her heart sank, her chest tightening. What if no one could hear her? What if she had picked up the headset too late? Then, a voice. Calm, steady, professional. "This is Jacksonville Center. Identify yourself." "Who's on the radio?" Relief surged through her so powerfully she nearly sobbed. Someone was there. Someone had heard her. She took a trembling breath, her voice quivering. My name's Emily. She glanced at the co-pilot, who was still locked in battle with the controls. "The pilot, he's not moving. The plane, it's falling." There was a pause on the other end, the silence heavy with shock. When the voice returned, it was firmer, more deliberate. "Emily, listen to me. You're very brave. Stay calm. We're going to help you. Can you tell me what kind of plane you're in?" Emily's eyes darted to the panel, scanning the maze of glowing instruments and labels. Panic surged. She didn't know. She didn't know what any of it meant. The co-pilot glanced at her, his voice strained. "Cessna. 765 Charlie." Emily repeated it into the mic, her voice barely steady. "Cessna 765 Charlie." "Copy that," the controller replied. "Emily, you're doing great. Can you see the altimeter?" "It's a round gauge. It shows numbers, usually in thousands of feet." Emily's eyes darted back to the panel. There were so many dials, so many spinning needles. She scanned them frantically until one caught her eye. The numbers were falling fast. She read them out loud, her voice trembling. The controller's tone shifted, a subtle gravity behind each word. Okay, Emily, you're losing altitude quickly. But you're not alone. We're going to talk you through this, step by step. The headset crackled again, another voice chiming in lower, slower, like a second guide joining the first. Emily, this is Captain Harris. I'm a flight instructor. I'm right here with you. Just keep breathing. We'll get you down safe. Her chest tightened with a strange mix of fear and hope. She wasn't alone anymore. There were voices in the static, calm and steady, lifelines pulling her through the chaos. But the weight of the moment pressed harder. Her hands were small, her voice shaky, her body trembling with every jolt of the plane. Yet she clutched the radio as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to life itself. In row 8, she had been just a kid with a notebook. But in the cockpit, with the headset pressed to her ears, she was the only voice between the falling plane and the ground rushing up to meet them. And for the first time, she believed she might be able to do this. The headset crackled with a hiss of static, like a storm just beyond hearing. Emily pressed the cups tighter against her ears, her small hands trembling. For a terrifying second, she thought the voices had vanished, swallowed by the void. Then, through the static, the calm tone returned. Emily, this is Jacksonville Center. We hear you loud and clear. Her heart lurched. The sound of that steady voice cut through the chaos around her like a rope tossed into deep water. She clung to it, fighting the tremors in her chest. I don't know what to do, she stammered. The plane, it's shaking. The pilot, he's not moving. Please, her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of the words. The controller answered without hesitation. Emily, you're not alone. We're right here with you. You're doing incredibly well. I want you to breathe for me. Just one slow breath. She sucked in a shaky gulp of air. Held it. Exhaled. That's it. Good. Now tell me, are you sitting in the pilot's seat? Emily glanced down. No, she wasn't. The co-pilot was still there, hands clenched around the yoke, his face pale with strain. He glanced at her, eyes wide, as if torn between disbelief and desperation. She's just a kid, he muttered hoarsely. But the radio crackled again. Emily, doesn't matter where you're sitting. What matters is you've got the radio. That makes you the most important person in that plane right now. The words hit her like a jolt. Most important person. She wanted to deny it, to shove the responsibility away. But the headset was heavy on her ears, the microphone hot against her lips, and there was no one else answering. She nodded instinctively, though they couldn't see her. Okay, she whispered. A second voice chimed in, slower and firmer than the first. Emily, my name is Captain Harris. I'm a flight instructor. I'll be your guide, all right? You just listen to me and repeat back what I say. We'll take this one step at a time. Her pulse raced. Okay, I'll try. That's all we need. His voice carried the patience of someone who had done this before, but beneath it was an urgency he couldn't completely hide. Now, Emily, look at the panel in front of you. Find the attitude indicator. It's a round dial with a little airplane symbol on it, half blue, half brown. Do you see it? Emily scanned the glowing dials, panic bubbling as her eyes blurred from all the numbers and needles. There were so many. But then she found it, a small symbol shaped like wings, tilting against a horizon line. I see it, she said, her voice catching. It's tilted. Good job. That's your artificial horizon. Right now, that tilt means your plane's banking. I need you to put your hands on the yoke carefully. Her gaze flicked to the co-pilot. His hands gripped the yoke so tightly, his knuckles were white. He stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. She can't, he started. Emily swallowed. He's already holding it, she said into the mic. Captain Harris's voice softened, but the authority was unshakable. "Then I need you to tell him this. Ease it back to center. Just gentle pressure. Don't fight the plane, guide it." She turned to the co-pilot, her voice trembling. "He says, don't fight it. Just guide it. Gentle." The man's jaw clenched, but he obeyed. Slowly, the little wings on the attitude indicator began to creep back toward level. The shuddering in the cabin eased slightly, though the alarm still screamed. "That's it," Harris said. "Perfect. You see what you just did, Emily? You kept that plane flying." Her breath caught. She hadn't touched the controls, but somehow she had been part of it. Her words, her voice, had steadied the aircraft. For the first time since the descent began, hope flickered. But the reprieve was fragile. The engine coughed again, a horrible grinding sound that vibrated through the cabin. The altimeter needle sank lower still. They were losing altitude too fast. "Emily," Harris's voice returned, sharper now. "I need you to read me your altitude." Numbers on the dial, with a long hand and short hand. "What do you see?" Her eyes darted across the gauges until she found the one. Her stomach flipped. It says 3,000. And it's falling. Static filled her ears for a moment. Then Harris spoke again, his voice measured but heavy. "Okay, 3,000. We've got time, Emily, but not much. Listen carefully. You're going to help us line this plane up with the ground. We'll get you down safe." The words felt impossible. How could she, a girl who had been doodling in a notebook only an hour ago, possibly bring down a plane? But Harris spoke with such certainty, such calm, that part of her wanted to believe. The co-pilot glanced at her again, his eyes haunted. "Keep talking," he muttered. "Don't stop talking." Emily gripped the radio tighter. The headset pressed against her skull, heavy with the weight of dozens of lives depending on her voice. Through the static, Captain Harris guided her, one instruction at a time. "Okay, Emily, look for the throttle. Black lever. Push it gently forward. See if the engine catches." She scanned the controls, her fingers brushing over knobs and switches until she found it. She shoved gently, her small hand straining against the weight of the lever. The engine growled, coughed, and steadied for a moment before sputtering again. "Good try," Harris said. "You bought us a few more seconds. That's all we need." She exhaled a shaky breath. A few seconds. That was something. Around her, the cabin was still a storm of fear, passengers clutching each other, whispering prayers, their eyes darting to her as though she were some strange beacon in the chaos. She felt their gaze pressing against her back. A child, just a child, and yet the only one speaking to the ground. The static flared again, and Harris's voice cut through, low and firm. "Emily, you're not just a passenger anymore. You're my co-pilot now. Do you understand?" Her throat tightened. She wasn't sure she did, but she pressed the mic button anyway. Yes, I understand." The words felt strange, foreign, too big for her. But once she said them, something shifted inside. She wasn't just a scared girl in row 8 anymore. She was holding the lifeline. And as the Cessna groaned and dipped, the voices in the static stayed with her, steady, unyielding. The plane was still falling. But Emily wasn't falling alone. The cockpit had become a furnace of sound. Alarms shrieked, the engine coughed and growled like a wounded beast, and every shudder of the fuselage rattled through Emily's bones. Sweat trickled down her temples, but her hands never left the headset. She clung to the voice in her ears, as if it were the only thing holding the plane aloft. "Emily," Captain Harris said, his tone steady, "you're doing great. But listen, gravity doesn't stop pulling. We're going to have to fight it together. You ready?" She swallowed hard. Her throat was dry as sandpaper. I think so. That's all I need, Harris replied. Thinking you can is enough. Now, look at your airspeed indicator. It's a round dial with numbers climbing by tens. Tell me what you see. Her eyes darted over the panel until they landed on the gauge. The needle was sinking too fast. 75? No, 70. There was a pause on the radio. Then the calm reply, Okay, Emily, 70's too slow for a bird that size. We need lift or gravity wins. Tell the co-pilot nose down, just a hair. Let the plane pick up speed. Emily turned to the man beside her. His jaw was locked, sweat beading on his brow. He says nose down, just a little. For speed, the co-pilot's eyes flickered, torn between disbelief and trust. Then he nodded, nudging the yoke forward. The plane tilted. Passengers screamed from the cabin as their stomachs dropped. Hold it steady, Harris instructed. Emily, check your airspeed again. She leaned closer, heart pounding. 85. 90. Perfect. That's lift, Emily. You just bought us wings again. Her chest tightened. She hadn't touched the controls herself, but her voice, her words, had turned panic into action. She exhaled, a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But the relief didn't last. Another jolt rocked the plane, sharper this time, as if the very sky was pulling them apart. The cabin rattled, overhead bins popped open, and a cascade of bags tumbled down the aisle. A child wailed. The Cessna dipped hard to the left. The co-pilot cursed, fighting the yoke with both hands. Emily nearly dropped the headset as she slammed her palm against the panel to steady herself. Talk to me, Emily, Harris said urgently. What's your attitude indicator showing? Her eyes flew to the dial. The little wings were tilted dangerously. It's leaning left. Way left. Okay, deep breath. Tell him right aileron, gentle. Don't yank. Just ease it. Emily repeated the words, her voice cracking. The co-pilot obeyed, pushing against the yoke. Slowly, painfully, the tilt began to correct. Good. That's good, Harris soothed. See, Emily? You're fighting gravity. You're flying the plane. Her heart pounded so violently it hurt. Flying the plane. She wanted to deny it, to insist she was only relaying words. But the truth pressed down on her. Every instruction went through her lips. Every correction depended on her voice not failing. The plane steadied, but only just. Behind her, the passengers were a sea of fear. Some cried softly into their hands. Others clutched one another like lifelines. One older woman whispered prayers, her rosary beads clinking with each trembling movement. Emily didn't dare turn around for long. If she saw their faces, the weight of their lives would crush her. She faced forward, staring at the endless horizon through the windshield. Clouds blurred past, sunlight flickered through cracks in the overcast, and the land far below seemed to rush closer with each passing second. Harris's voice returned, calm but unyielding. Emily, I want you to listen very carefully now. We're going to set up for a glide. That means balancing speed with descent. It'll feel like you're falling, but it's controlled. Do you understand? Her lips trembled. I'll try. That's all I ask. Tell him trim nose slightly up. Ease the throttle back. Emily relayed the words. The co-pilot adjusted. The plane groaned, shuddered, then steadied again in a shallow descent. Good, Harris said. That's your glide. You've got control now. Control. The word felt surreal. Just minutes ago, she had been doodling in a notebook, feet swinging above the carpet in row 8. Now she was in the cockpit, guiding a machine heavier than anything she could comprehend. But even as she clung to Harris's voice, fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve. What if she said the wrong word? What if she mixed up the instructions? A single mistake could send them all into the ground. As if sensing her fear, Harris's tone softened. Emily, you're not alone. Every pilot in this room is with you. Every controller on this frequency has your back. We'll carry you through. She nodded, though tears blurred her eyes. Okay, she whispered. Static flared. Another voice broke in calmer, almost fatherly. Emily, this is Captain Morales. I've flown that model of Cessna. She's tough. She wants to fly. Just trust her, and she'll trust you. Emily clutched the headset tighter. Two voices now, steady as anchors in the storm. The minutes blurred into a rhythm. Harris calling out instructions, Emily repeating them, the co-pilot obeying. Slowly, the Cessna leveled into something less violent, less chaotic. But the reprieve was fragile. The altimeter still fell. The fuel gauge still trembled near empty. The ground loomed closer, patchwork fields and winding roads beginning to take shape below. Emily's throat tightened as she whispered into the mic. Can we really land this? There was a pause. Then Harris spoke, gentle but firm. Emily, I won't lie. It won't be easy. But you've already done the hardest part. You stopped the fall. Now we just need to finish the fight. Her pulse quickened. Stopped the fall. Fought gravity. Finished the fight. Words too big for a 12-year-old, yet here she was, carrying them on her shoulders. She glanced at the co-pilot. His eyes, once filled with disbelief, now held something different. Respect, dependence, as though he knew, just as she did, that the voices on the radio weren't speaking to him anymore. They were speaking to her. Emily pressed the microphone close, her voice steadier than before. Okay, Captain. Tell me what to do next. And for the first time since the nightmare began, the cockpit felt less like a tomb and more like a battlefield she might actually survive. The horizon was no longer distant. It filled the windshield in jagged patches of green fields, glimmering rivers, and pale gray roads that snaked like veins across the earth. The ground wasn't abstract anymore. It was rushing closer, undeniable, demanding a choice, land or fall. Emily's throat tightened as she stared ahead. The headset felt heavier than ever, the microphone pressing against lips that trembled or refused to fall silent. She pressed the transmit button. Captain Harris. I can see the ground. It's close. The reply came quick, calm, but layered with urgency. That's good, Emily. That's where we want to be. Now listen carefully. We're going to line you up for landing. Do exactly as I say, and we'll get you down. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought it might shake the headset off. Landing. The word itself felt like both salvation and doom. Could she really do it? Could a girl who'd never even touched a steering wheel put a Cessna safely on the ground? Emily, Harris continued, look ahead of you. Do you see a strip of pavement? Long, straight, with markings? Emily squinted through the haze of tears and glare. At first, it was just a blur, but then she saw it. A narrow line of asphalt cutting through the fields, shimmering in the sun. Her chest clenched. Yes, I see it. That's your runway, Harris said. That's home. All you have to do is bring us there. Behind her, the cabin was hushed. Even the sobbing had quieted, as if every passenger was holding their breath, clinging to her words, her courage. She didn't dare turn around, but she felt their faith pressing against her back, like a fragile but unshakable wall. The co-pilot leaned toward her, his voice low, almost reverent. You've got this. Just keep listening. Her hands shook, but she nodded. Okay, Emily, Harris's voice cut through. Tell him to line the nose up with the runway. Small corrections. Left aileron, steady. Good, the co-pilot obeyed. Slowly, the Cessna's nose swung toward the strip of asphalt. The ground filled the windshield now, terrifying in its closeness. "Airspeed?" Harris asked. Emily checked the dial. 95. Perfect. Keep it just like that. Don't let it drop below 80. The plane dipped lower, the fields rushing up. Emily's palms grew slick with sweat. Her stomach flipped with every bump of turbulence. "Emily," Harris said softly, "when you're close, you'll need to flare. That means gently pulling back on the yoke to raise the nose. It slows your descent and lets the wheels touch down smoothly." Can you remember that word? Flare. She repeated it to herself like a prayer. Flare, flare. The runway was a black ribbon beneath them now, growing wider, closer, inevitable. 200 feet, Harris's voice announced. Almost there. Keep her steady. Emily's breath came fast and shallow. The cabin was silent, except for the rattling of overhead bins and the faint whimper of a child. Every soul on board was waiting on her next words. 100 feet. Get ready, Harris guided. The ground roared up to meet them. Emily felt her knees go weak. She forced herself to grip the mic tighter, to find her voice. Now? Not yet, Harris said. Hold, hold. The Cessna plunged lower, the runway filling the windshield. Emily's pulse raced so hard, she thought her chest might burst. Now, Emily, tell him flare. Her voice rang out, breaking the silence. Flare. The co-pilot pulled back on the yoke. The nose of the plane lifted, the descent slowed, the ground skimming just beneath them. For a breathless instant, it felt like they were hovering, suspended between sky and earth. Then, contact. The wheels slammed against the runway with a jolt that rattled every bone in Emily's body. The plane bounced once, twice, then screeched as rubber caught pavement. The cabin erupted with the sound of tires skidding, metal groaning, flaps straining. Hold steady, Harris commanded. Keep her straight, throttle back. Emily relayed the words. The co-pilot followed, his hands steady now, guided by her trembling voice. The Cessna roared down the runway, slowing, until finally, mercifully, it rolled to a grinding halt. For a moment, silence. No alarms, no screaming, no rattling. Just the sound of breath, collective and disbelieving. Then the cabin exploded with sobs, cheers, prayers shouted into the air. Passengers clutched one another, kissed the backs of their hands, buried their faces in relief. Emily ripped off the headset, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Her chest heaved as she sucked in lungfuls of air. Her legs felt like jelly. The co-pilot turned to her, his eyes wet. For a long moment, he said nothing, as though words had been stripped from him. Then, hoarsely, You saved us. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I just talked. But in her heart, she knew it wasn't just talking. She had carried the weight of a plane, of dozens of lives, with nothing but her voice and the courage to keep breathing when the sky wanted to swallow her whole. Outside the windows, fire trucks and ambulances were already rushing across the tarmac, red lights spinning. The world had seen their descent. Help was waiting. Emily leaned back, finally letting herself cry. She wasn't just the kid in row 8 anymore. She was the girl who had fought gravity, silence, and fear, and won. And as the passengers filed out, one by one thanking her with trembling hands and tear-streaked faces, she realized something she would carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes, the smallest voice in the storm is the one that saves everyone.